Hi everyone, this is Matt. I'm here to do a quick instructional video for you to show you how to make an apple pie. This recipe my dad taught me when I was a kid, and by taught me I mean it's just the Betty Crocker one, like the big Betty Crocker cookbook. It's the recipe that's in there with just a few changes. So in the recipe they tell you to prepare the crust first. I universally find this to be a terrible idea. Because preparing the filling actually takes a long time. So I thought we'd just do the filling first and then do the crust because the crust is really fast. So just as far as this, some people have apple peeling machines. I don't have one of those. I just like to use it by hand. These are Empire apples, which I don't know if they're good ones for pie, but that's the ones I got. I like to have the apples aged a little bit. I like them a little bit old, just so that they're a little bit past ripe, that they're softer, and they bake up softer. Now, you might be asking yourself, do I have to make the filling myself, or can I buy it in a can? I'm going to go ahead and tell you that, yeah, you got to make it yourself. And the important part is to remember that you don't have to hit this on 100%. You don't have to have a perfect pie. It doesn't have to be the nicest thing you've ever seen. Everyone will love it. It doesn't matter, man. They just want to eat your delicious pie. Doesn't matter how it looks, as long as it tastes good. They're good. And it's easy to make it taste good. Just put a boatload of sugar in it. And that's really what most pies are. Is just like sugar with a carriage of fruit. Peeling this is a great chore to hand off to kids, and there's even a game you can do with it, is if you can try and get the peel in one long peel, which is even difficult for an adult to do, but it kind of, I almost got it. It just kind of helps develop peeling skills, and also keeps you from getting bored through this process, because peeling the apples and everything is a boring process and time consuming. As far as cutting them up, it's really whatever's easiest for you. There's a couple methods that I've used in the past. So you cut them into quarters and then use a paring knife to kind of get out the stem, and then that center seed pod. You got to get all that center seed pod out. Because that will not soften in the cook. It will always be a cartilagey, gross, chewy mess, and nobody likes that. So that was one way of just kind of angling it out. I'll do it again with a better view for the camera here. So go like that, and then just getting down into that pod. I like to use a tiny paring knife for that. And then there you go. And that's just how to maintain the most apple. I threw my apple in the trash. I don't know why I did that. So do it if you just crack all four, and then again, this is just going to go into a pie, which kind of is a weird mush of stuff anyway. So the actual shape of the apple isn't terribly important. So, and then just slice it in, and the thinner you slice your slices, the less likely it's going to be crunchy inside the pie, which again is something I don't enjoy. Some people do. I do recommend, get your knife skills going. So I did it just in long cuts like this. However, if you could cut it the opposite direction if you wanted. It's really whatever works for you. Because again, as long as your apple ends up in pieces, that's what you want. Apple, and I'm just piling them in a bowl here. They're gonna go brown. They're gonna do that just because it takes a while to make this. It's just you just live with it. You want to get as much peel out of it as possible. Occasional peel or piece of seed might make it in, and then you can tell people it's kind of like lumpy mashed potatoes. It's those little imperfections that make it that you know that it was done by hand. So the other way that I found that I like doing it, chop your apples in quarters again, and then take that quarter, chop it in half, so it's kind of like the grain of the apple, so there's the seed pod there, and here's the stem. If you cut it in half like that, there you go. Then all you got to do is take it. You can just do it with your big knife and cut that chunk out. Cut that piece of stem and seed pod out. And that, I found, goes a lot faster. We've gotten through that. I forgot to mention, so the recipe calls for 6 to 8 apples. The apples from the bag were rather small, so I just did all of them. And then, except the one I dropped on the floor. Alright, so, but that's all our apples all chopped up into itty bitty bits. So next comes the rest of the filling. So we have 2/3 cup sugar. Again, this is just the Big Betty Crocker book with a few very small changes. Then it asks for a 1/4 cup of flour. Now the 1/4 cup of flour is important. This will bond with the butter that we'll do later, and that will thicken up the sauce. The butter is an easy step to forget, or the flour. Either one is easy to forget, and you know you forgot it when you pull a slice out and then juice just floods into the pan. So we want to make sure you got your flour in there. So next is the nutmeg and cinnamon. So it does call for a 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, which I follow. It also calls for a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, which I find to be grossly insufficient. I'd go more towards a tablespoon of cinnamon. And then a pinch of salt, which I actually like to do the pinch myself, but for all intents and purposes, it's 1/8 of a teaspoon on there. And then you just kind of mix that up. I've been mixing it just by shaking the bowl for so long is what I do, but otherwise a fork will work rather nicely. But yeah, you want to get that all mixed up nice and even. And then we're gonna mix it into our apples here. So again, they ask you to do in the recipe it asks you to do the crust first, and the filling takes so long to do, I just don't think that's a good idea. It's just easier to get the filling done first, because the filling can sit for a while, whereas the crust, especially once you get that bottom crust set in, the top crust will dry out and will be an absolute nightmare to get on there. And if you did a good job on the crust, it should already be pretty difficult to get on there in the first place. So when we got all this mixed up sufficiently here, then just kind of dump it into our apples. And then take a wooden spoon and get that mixed up. And then once you have that sufficiently mixed up, we're just gonna, you can cover it or not cover it. I'll probably just leave it uncovered. And then we'll work on the crust and get that ready. The sugar in this apple, or sugar in this filling, will draw the juice out of the apple, so it's gonna be pretty liquidy pretty quick. So you just wanna, so don't be alarmed if you got a little soup on the bottom there. That's not a big deal. And then you wanna put that in the pie, because that's all good sugar. And again, sugar is what we're after here. It's just a carriage for a different kind of sugar to give to people. So yeah, now that we got this mixed up, I'm gonna reset and I will show you how to do the crust. Okay, guys, coming back as Matt, coming back for the crust portion of making the apple pie. Now this is where all the skill is. You're gonna need a few special tools. First, pastry cutter. This one is the least common one, but most people should have it around. It saves you a ton of time in this process. You'll want a pastry cloth. You do need this. So it's just this is just like a canvas cloth, kind of like a muslin stiff canvas cloth that you'll roll the pastry out on. And it really makes it easier if you have, this is just a cloth cover that goes over your rolling pin. And this is a French rolling pin. So yeah, that's nice. But yeah, as far as that's about the special tools, a lot of the work is going to get done with your fork. So as far as what makes up the crust, it's a very simple recipe. It's flour, so 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Now, a lot of people go back and forth of what flour they use and don't use. I just use whatever unbleached flour is handy. I'm not that particular. A teaspoon of salt. I always like to go with iodized salt, because the iodized salt pours. And then shortening. Shortening's good. It will make your crust flaky. I'm just taking the shortening. Now the thing with the shortening is that they say 2/3 cup plus 2 tablespoons. The shortening, more shortening you put in here, the flakier your crust is going to be. So you want your crust to stand, but other than that, you want it to just crumble when anything touches it, which is you know, the point of the exercise, man. That's what people are going for. It'll also keep your crust from getting soggy on the bottom. All right, so I got that. So once you got your shortening in there, take your pastry cutter and you kind of go through in this motion here. So you push down on the side and push it in. Now you're just going to keep rotating this around, rotate your bowl, and cut it through with your pastry cutter over and over again. What you're doing is you're chopping this shortening up into nothing, just making it all mixed clean through. Now, there's no machine that really does this very well for you. You just got to do it by hand. Now, gluten is your enemy on this. Now, typically, gluten is your friend when you're making breads, which everybody's been doing lately. You know, you want your gluten to make your bread rise and hold it together and everything. Well, with a pie crust, exact opposite. Gluten is your enemy, because gluten is the opposite of a flaky crust. Gluten is what makes your crust tough and shoe leathery and awful. So what happens with gluten, though, gluten is a combination of water and flour very often. And so what we're doing is we're putting enough shortening in here to hold everything together so we don't have to worry about water getting into our flour and making our crust tough. So just keep on cutting. You see I still got some little clumps of shortening in here, which we don't want. We want it to be all even all through here. So keep on cutting. So this part isn't too hard. It's just time consuming and takes some strength, and it'll tire you out a little bit. But just keep on cutting. And sometimes you gotta clean it out a little bit, get that shortening stuck off that's stuck on the sides here, get that cleaned off. Alright. Also, you should have been preheating your oven to 425. That's not really, I mean, it's in the recipe. Again, the Big Betty Crocker cookbook, apple pie, and it's got a pastry crust. It's pretty simple. All right, so that's pretty good. So there's the clumps of like flour and shortening are held together. You can kind of see it's pretty evenly spread throughout here. Now the next step, this is where the skill comes in, all right? So you would use 4 to 5 tablespoons of water. So we want to be pretty stingy on the water because the purpose is the water is what's going to hold it together while it bakes. So the water is what's going to make it one pastry. However, also the water will make it tough, so we want to avoid as much. Now here's a cheat I use. You want to use cold water. Instead of cold water, I use vodka. The alcohol will evaporate out of the crust and leave it just a just a nice flaky thing there. And then there's just enough water from the melting ice and in the vodka itself to to bind it together as much as you need. So the trick with this, and this is where skill comes in, you spread out a couple tablespoons in here. You just want to start with 2 or 3 to start. Take your fork, and this is, you're just going to flip. Just dig into the bottom and flip it up. You don't want to overhandle anything, because the less you handle it, the flakier it's going to be. You want everything to be nice and flaky. You don't want it to get tough on you. So you just keep flaking it through, flipping it through, until you're reasonably certain that's nice and mixed in. So we'll give it a couple more. So now if you were doing just straight water, just straight cold water, you can only put in 5 tablespoons of water, which still leaves you with a pretty difficult dough to work with. Because I'm putting in vodka, I'm actually going to put in more than I need, more water, and that's going to let me get this dough nice and wet, and then I can work with it a lot easier. And that's just really the crux of it, is you want it to be easy to work with. So you can see there's kind of these balls here, those balls and clumps. That's good. That's what we want. Just keep flipping up from the bottom. All right. So now this looks pretty good. It's pretty good. So next step, we're going to take our pastry cloth. You're going to set it out. It helps if you have the ability to weigh it down with stuff. I like to use my flour in my dough here. This guy, you might as well get your pie plate handy. I like this one. There's a nice deep one, is helpful for apple pie. Alright, so you want to grab about half of the dough. You're gonna, the bottom crust is a little bit more than half. A little, it uses more dough than the top crust, obviously, because it has to curve up through the bottom. So you grab some dough and you kind of pack it in here. You want to handle it as little as possible, but so you're essentially kind of making a hockey puck here. You compress it in, use your thumb to make it, a disc as flat and round as you can. Now the bottom crust you got a lot of leeway on, remember, because it's not really as visible. So you can make a lot of fixes to it. Alright, so now this is it's nice and flat there. So we're going to put some flour down. Lightly flour this surface there. Put that on. Put flour on our rolling pin, and this just helps hold on to flour easier, so that the dough doesn't stick to the rolling pin as much and you don't have to cover everything with flour while you do it. So then you just roll this out as evenly as possible. You're going to move move stuff out of the way. It's French rolling pin likes to have a lot of room. A little bit more flour on here. You can tear off and put in some other spots or fill in some cracks with dough. It's alright. You can do little cheats like that. That is a-okay. I like fill in spots here. Fill in some more. Alright. So I'm going to try this. I haven't done this method before of rolling the dough up on the rolling pin. Typically I fold it and drop it, but that hasn't been working for me lately, so I'm going to try something different today. So we got that on there, and try and even it up as much as we can here. Press and get in, fill in the corners here. And again, this is pretty forgiving on the bottom crust. You can make some fixes and some changes without folks noticing at all. So let me do that. Overall, that rolling pin method actually worked pretty nicely. Alright, now it's our oven preheated, which is good. Just going to take a knife and cut off the edges here. One thing I recommend for this pie, speaking of the oven, was you want to have some kind of oven liner or something underneath. It's very common for this pie to boil over, so you want to have something prepared for it, prepared to catch it, because especially if you have a gas oven, anything boiling over will make a real mess, a real smoky mess, which you don't like. Alright, so we got a pie crust. So we got a bottom crust on here. I like to even it out just a little bit. Put some in there. Alright, so yeah, it's our bottom crust. Which we're going to make our top crust here. These chunks you can just throw off to the side. You will have extra crust. It's just the way it is. So squish this into a bottom corner here so you can pick it up. Okay, you can see this is pretty crumbly already. So you want to get some flattened out here. And even out the edges as much as you can before you lay it down, as that'll make your life a lot easier when you're rolling it out. Alright, so set that there. All right, so Miss Catherine did ask me to mention, if you are, if you are a young person working on this, make sure your parents are helping you a bit, because there are some tools you have to use. When we were talking about the filling, you had to use a sharp knife. As with this, when I was putting the vodka in there, obviously you don't want to do anything like that without your parents' input. And we're going to throw some of this on here just to get the last of our crust on here, because I want this crust to be plenty big enough. Alright. Cut some off here, roll it onto there. You can do these little fixes if you do them earlier. Then you don't have to worry about trying to fix it while it's on the pie, which is not really very fun. Down there. See, I got kind of the split in the middle here. Try and fill that in. Just stealing dough from other parts and filling in. Because what we're trying to do is we're just trying to get a nice, round, flat, even surface. Alright. So I think that's pretty good. I think we're in pretty good shape here. I think you're supposed to have it like a 1/4 inch thick, which I do it pretty thin, so hopefully we're a-okay here. But yeah, alright, so we're good. We're going to set this aside a little bit. Going to take our pie crust here, our bottom crust that we had done. We're going to fill it in with our apple filling. Now some of you might ask, what about the butter that we had mentioned earlier, which I almost forgot, which is a very common thing to forget. Don't forget the butter. So I'm going to have to run and grab that and chop that up real quick. Let's get all these apples in here. Alright, this is a pretty full pie. It's going to make a mess in the oven. I got oven liners in there though, so I'm not too concerned, but make sure you have something to catch it. Otherwise, and if you do have something to catch it, you might have to swap that out before the bake is done, because spilled pie juice, if it gets on like a cookie sheet or something, will burn pretty quickly. So you don't want to have a big smoky mess going on. So we need to do 2 tablespoons of butter. And then this you don't want to just drop it in there, obviously. You want to slice it up so it's got pads all around. And the idea is that it will melt and go down through the pie, like sink down through it. And then again react with that butter, or react with that flour, and turn into kind of a thick goop, which will, make your filling more goopy. And so it will stay together as a pie when you put it on a plate. Otherwise it'll be pie crust with soup, which obviously is less than ideal. Alright, now we're going to try and do this transfer one more time. This is generally the toughest transfer, and the reason is because there's, it's least forgiving because this one is on top. So rolling this up gently, and then just getting it on the edge there, and unrolling it over top. Yeah, that came out alright. Alright, I'm pretty pleased. Alright. So, the next step, so we can move this over here. Take our butter knife, and we're just going to trim around the edge here. Trim all the excess off here because we don't need that hanging over the edge. And then freehand it over the handles here, and then go down the line. Alright, so we got a nice flat crust. Actually, this is probably the best top crust I've ever done, so I'm glad I got that on camera. Squishing this around. So this is what closes the edge up here. So you're just taking the fork, putting it on and squishing her down and pulling back. And it kind of gives you this little zippered edge, which I like. There are a bunch of different styles of closing your pie. This is the only one my dad ever taught me, and I never bothered to learn any others. So this is the one I use. Now, some recipes will recommend putting foil around the edge to protect the edge so it doesn't get, essentially toasted more than the rest of the pie, which you can do. I don't, but it's something you can. All right, so we got our pie here. Now what you want to do is you want to have some vents in the top, so that steam can exit out the top. So you would poke around here. Try not to make big tears in the crust like I just did. Now something vitally important is you want to cut a letter into the top, whichever letter has meaning for you. I always do this myself. So I like to cut an H in the top of my pie. Y'all who know how to pick a letter, you would know why. All right, so this is the pie. This is essentially your apple pie. You sprinkle on some cinnamon sugar on the top. Now this will caramelize over the top and make a little crust, and that is delightful. And that's it. This is our pie. We'll include a still of how it all came out with the video. But again, this is my name's Matt. I'm making an apple pie. I'll probably be back pretty soon to make a pumpkin with a very similar recipe. Yeah, and thank you very much for watching. So here's the pie as it is completed. Just kind of a post-mortem. So you can see, actually, I did overfill it. The entire top of the pie was lifted up, and I got some pretty significant overflow all around it. So yeah, I'll admit I was wrong on that. You could probably use a lot less filling than I did.